Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The U.S. Special Representative for the DPRK has held a meeting with the South Korean officials on President Moon Jae-in's renewed call for an end-of-war declaration, with the DPRK showing conditional interest. So what did they discuss, and how will the talk shape diplomatic policy towards the North? And would an end-of-war declaration pave the way for negotiations for a peace treaty on the Peninsula? To discuss these issues and more, here in the studio are Anna Tangen, an independent current affairs commentator, and Teng Jianquan, director of the Center of Arms Control at the China Institute of International Studies. And we'll be joined by Professor Kim Chung-Kim from Korean University School of Law. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, the Sudan's top general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan is addressing the press in Khartoum a day after the military seized the power there. Now let's take a look at the live feed.
The Almighty, the Merciful, may God's peace and blessings be upon His sealed Prophet Muhammad, and His peace and blessings be with you. You are the representatives of the media, the pulse of the people. And I am certain that you will convey the true message and the true picture on the basis of which the majority of public opinion in Sudan will be formed. It is your professional duty. It is the fifth state to shed light on the truth and to inform the public and to convey the picture with absolute objectivity, balance, and professionalism. This is what we hope for and we depend on. It is a mutual mission. Transparency, veracity, and truthfulness, and above all, patriotism. Patriotism is a priority, not only to the media, but to each and every Sudanese citizen. Once again, I salute and welcome you. Hope that we will all join forces towards building our own homeland. We are here to make clear the guiding principles for our future. Once again, we totally appreciate your role, and we also appreciate the dire situation our country is going through. We have all been closely monitoring the changes that took place since the beginning of the transitional period. It was the outcome of people's sacrifices. The Sudanese people have sacrificed a lot. Many lives were lost, and we all bank on the role and sacrifices of the people. All these sacrifices were made for the sake of transition towards democracy, justice, and peace. These were the slogans we all cherished and shared. These slogans were totally appreciated when the masses of the people gathered and demonstrated before our headquarters. It was our duty to respond to the demands and desires of the people. And these slogans represent the basis for building our civil state. And from the beginning, we have joined forces with the national political parties, including the civil factions, which we all cooperated together. And since the signing of the Unity Charter, which we all agreed upon, and the constitutional document we pledged to honor, we had hoped to march forward towards building our country. We in the armed forces, with absolute veracity, have offered all compromises to enable the Sudanese people materialize their aspiration under a civil rule, to put an end to their sufferings, to examine and to address their problems, and above all, to provide solutions to these problems. Following these changes, we had thought that the late Bashir al-Dhahab template would have applied for a short transitional period. Then general elections will be held where the people will elect the ruler. However, many of the political factions have explained on numerous occasions that this template wouldn't apply. It was 16 years ago. It has been a long time. That's why many of the political parties believed that after 30 years under the military rule, many changes have taken place, including the political parties, and that's why we all agreed that the transitional period should extend a little further so that we should together cross to the other side of our dreams. That we had all hoped that by the end of the transitional period, the Sudanese people will be able to elect their representatives and to elect their ruler. We had also thought that the transitional period would be a field of cooperation where all efforts could be dovetailed. Yet, due to the absence of agreement and absence of cooperation, we have lost and we have missed a lot. We had hoped that the principles we had cherished would transcend above any personal, factional, or partisan gains, until we have come to a bottleneck where on a number of occasions we had to stand up to the Prime Minister and the factions who had signed the constitutional document with ourselves. On these occasions we have witnessed and we have touched a great deal of disagreement. It was a struggle for power sharing, distribution of the Legislative Council seats, distribution of offices across the provinces, and also distributing offices in many of the executive branch. As a result, we have come to a political fragmentation. All these dire consequences had caused the armed forces to step in. Those who have been following the political landscape in Sudan would have clearly realized that we have been doing all what we can to bring all the parties together, to maintain our harmony, and to accommodate all the political factions, including the Freedom and Changes forces and other factions believing in the principles of transition and the constitutional document together in one part to join forces and to march forward. We proposed that the National Conference, the previous ruling party, would take part in certain fields within the Legislative Council. However, the initiative created by the Prime Minister was hijacked, and those factions started even to interfere in the armed forces' affairs, despite the fact that the armed forces was not represented in the initiative. Following the initiative, a number of the freedom of change forces, which were in the past made up of a number of factions, the Nida Sudan, the National Congress, and other factions.
Okay, obviously this is a long statement explaining basically, why they are taking the military action against the civilian cabinet in Sudan. So Jian Quan, from your observation, what are the factors leading to such a military action, the unrest?
This is actually a continuation of power sharing, especially the recent development in that country. For example, as the general mentioned, the government would like to intervene in the military affairs, and the military was very angry at this time. So I think this is actually a continuation of the struggle for the power sharing. And I'm sure the military has been a very important player in this game, and for decades, military in that country always, has been a key player in the power transition or power sharing. So I think this time it's a continuation of the old game.
Right, right. I think in the previous statement, the military basically said that the bickering of this cabinet, the different factions, somehow led to them to take the action. But Anna, look at this country now. We have this military action. The civilian cabinet was basically dissolved. The sovereign council dissolved. And what's the next step? What's the ultimate outcome coming out of this action?
Well, it's all predicated on this idea that they'll go back to a democracy. And as you heard him say, they wanted to do it quicker, but because they met with the opposition parties and things like that, they said it would take a longer period of time. Obviously, when you dissolve a government, you start moving people out of place and you start putting people in. So it's not going to be welcomed by the international world, but this is, in the end, an internal matter. And as we've seen with Afghanistan and so many other places, if countries feel that they want to wade in there, they might, they will, based on experience, cause more misery and harm than good.
No good option, probably.
There is no good option, no.
Okay, coming back to our topic, the Korean Peninsula discussions, U.S. Special Representative Professor Kim, we know the U.S. Special Envoy talked to his South Korean counterpart about, we were told about this end of war declaration. So what has come out of these talks?
I think other than the fact that there was a talk between the U.S. envoy and the Korean envoy about end of war declaration, there hasn't been any substantive outcome from that meeting which has been disclosed yet. So not a lot of meat to talk about, but a significant point is that the U.S. envoy and South Korean representative, they met and they did discuss end of war declaration, and the U.S. felt it appropriate to disclose that they are in dialogue regarding end of war declaration.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anna, back to you here. The U.S. seems to the outsiders is kind of being hesitant, whether to support such an idea or not, end of war declaration. So that's why people could say, like Professor Kim said, the U.S. disclosing about the information that we are talking about this, that's an important step. Why the U.S. is hesitant about that?
Well, it's not clear exactly what the long-term strategy is. I mean, the issue is the U.S. has said that they would have talks with no preconditions, but behind that is the fact that the U.S. is aiming at denuclearization of the entire peninsula. That means North Korea giving up their nukes. and I just can't see that happening. It's the only strategic advantage they have. They've been using it successfully to basically stave off the United States for quite a period of time. So it's really hard to see how this goes. But Moon Jae-in is 8 months away from an election. He wants, he ran, his whole predication for running was he was going to unite the two peninsulas. I mean, the two countries on the peninsula, two nations, and that hasn't happened. So I think it's perhaps a courtesy to him to talk about this. From his point of view, he wants peace, he wants no nukes and no regime change. But right now, it's very hard how you put those pieces together.
Jian, what's the attitudes from North Korea? Like, do they welcome such an initiative, declaration, formal declaration of the end of war? For those who are not familiar with the situation, some would say this is the longest war, actually. Yeah. 1950, 1953, it's not yet officially ended.
Yeah, I think that the DPRK side would be very interested in such a proposal to end the war declared, by the two sides. I mean, by the United States or by ROK at this moment, because it's a condition for the normalization of relations between DPRK and the United States. And I'm sure everyone knows that from 2018, DPRK just initiated economic development policy. That is to say, when DPRK has got the nuclear bombs, and DPRK would like to shift a little bit to the economic development to improve the social life of that country and also to improve the relations with all the countries in the world. But this time, if you have a comparison between the policy taken by President Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, and the current president of the United States, you can see they have very different approaches to DPRK. This time, Biden, to my understanding, has not put DPRK issue or nuclear issue in Korean Peninsula on the top agenda. After at least 9 months, the special representatives from the United States just had a talk with the officials in ROK. So they just show the hesitancy you mentioned just now, because the nuclear issue in Korean Peninsula is not the top #1 job for Biden administration. So there are some, reluctance for the countries concerned to continue the engagement at this moment.
Well, Professor Kim, tell us, President Moon Jae-in has pushed very hard about the idea of the formal declaration of the end of the war. He has mentioned the idea at least 3 times, people counted. What's the consideration behind such insistence?
I think there has been a very significant change of U.S. Policy towards Korean Peninsula during Donald Trump's presidency. A change, I'm saying, but we all know that his policy just turned out to be a miserable failure. It was like big flip-flop, and then there was no clear direction or vision. But an important change was introduced, which is North Korea is regarded as an equal party, counterpart for negotiation. That has never happened before. So that is significant change. And I think President Moon Jae-in is trying to capitalize on that little step. And I think perhaps end of war declaration is the least disruptive step towards more greater and more far-reaching peace in Korean Peninsula. So everybody recognizes that there is no more any war. So why not just officially say that there is no more war? So that's the very least disruptive step Moon Jae-in is trying to push, and we will have to wait and see.
Well, as you said, this is basically the acceptance of the reality. There's no more war in the Korean Peninsula. Why the U.S. is a bit reluctant to support the South Korean initiative here?
I think it goes to show the self-contradictory stance of United States. I think most parties concerned here, like North Korea, South Korea, China, even Russia, they are all in favor of declaring end of war, except for U.S. and Japan. So it seems that as far as peace is concerned, U.S. and Japan are the odd men out here. And that kind of reduces the U.S. stance in this whole agenda. And maybe that works as some sort of pressure. And can you not even accept the reality? You know, that is the message. And how U.S. government is going to deal with it, it is for everybody to see. And not much progress is being made because I think United States itself does not have a clear idea about what is best for its own interest. So far, the orthodoxy used to be that the Republicans are hawkish and Democrats are, tend to be less hawkish. But during Trump's presidency, that orthodoxy has completely broken down. When Trump was trying to engage, the Democrats turned out to be far more hawkish and belligerent, and they were all against engagement. So now everything needs to start fresh. There is no accepted orthodoxy anymore, and I mean, ironically, the field is more widely open for Moon Jae-in, Kim Jong-un, and Biden and Xi Jinping to work out some sort of solution.
Mm-hmm. And 9 months into the Biden presidency, are we clear what is his policy towards the Korean Peninsula, except for that we are ready to talk to North Korean side at any time, any place without conditions?
Yeah, you have to understand, I mean, everything he's doing is about the domestic situation. He wants to appear that he's doing something about the South Korea, North Korea issue, but it's actually intractable because despite what my former colleague who just spoke said, it's precondition. There is no way that the U.S. Can emerge from any deal without denuclearization, and that is on both sides of the aisle. If Biden were to agree with peace, but there was no denuclearization, and I think from the North Korean side, they would also want the lifting of sanctions. If those things don't happen, he would be under attack from both sides. He's already at the lowest ebb of his popularity. That would really drive him. It would be just food for the Republicans to claim that he's weak and that he's given away, American opportunities and that he didn't extract anything. So at this point, as I said, I believe this is more window dressing. It does not open up any doors.
Mm-hmm. But there's also one issue, as Professor Kim mentioned, about because of the U.S. change of administration, it's harder to have a consistent policy.
It's impossible, and that's what happened. You had a small break in the chain when Clinton came in and negotiated. Unfortunately, after him, Bush came in and basically threw the baby in the bathwater out the door. Since then, there's been really no trust going back and forth. Lots of missteps on both sides, and as a result, when there is no trust, what Trump did in 2019 was more show than go. And it was not clear that there was anything that he could do, despite what he said, what my colleague said about the Republicans joining in. Actually, the Republicans are still pretty hawkish. They were giving in to the weight of Donald Trump's political push. So
that is true. Jian Chun, South Korean foreign minister has been urging the U.S. side to ease some of the sanctions on North Korea so as to prepare for it's like a momentum, create some momentum or trust, and then they can start some discussions. Do you think the U.S. will buy that idea? We will ease some sanctions and then we can start talks?
Maybe in the coming month or coming years, the United States lift some of the sanctions against the DPRK because Biden administration this time would like to give more opportunity or space or room to ROK. If you look at the recent history, you can see that during the engagement in 2018, the Biden administration, the Trump administration just say you cannot go even further. You just follow my step for the issue in the Korean Peninsula. So at this time, Biden might give much more room to Moon Jae-in government, and Moon Jae-in would like to take such an opportunity. Recently they restored the hotline between the two sides, and since Moon Jae-in would like to play a very important role in this game, I'm sure the two sides, I mean DPRK and ROK, can go even further, and the United States might lift some sanctions against DPRK.
But how likely, how far can the two Koreas, to forge a closer and closer relationship without the endorsement of the United States?
No, I don't think the United States will give such an endorsement to give freedom to exchange ideas between the two Koreans at this moment, because Korean Peninsula should be a very important part for the so-called competition policy by the Biden administration to engage ROK as partner in such a competition. So I think they can give some room to Moon Jae-in's government, but not the whole, give the whole freedom. Limited endorsement might be in the future, not the whole, freedom for the engagement between DPRK and ROK.
Professor Kim, what's your take? So without the U.S. approval, basically, South Korea, there's a limited, how far they can go in improving their ties with North side.
Yeah, as a Korean, obviously, it doesn't feel nice. Koreans, North Koreans, South Koreans, they are treated as some sort of pawn in a chess game. The big players are there, and then we were just at the forefront. It doesn't feel nice, but that's the reality. And I think Moon Jae-in government and hopefully Kim Jong-un government, they are both trying to work out something. And as long as we don't hear this word so-called CVID, I think that's just in plain speaking, it only means we don't want any change. When U.S. does not want any change, they start to talk about CVID. But as long as we don't hear that word, there might be some positive development cooking underneath. But we will have to...
Tell us, what is CVID? Professor, please explain.
Complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of North Korean nuclear arms, and U.S. demands for complete denuclearization of North Korea, first of all, up front. That's a delusional demand. Everybody knows that that wouldn't happen. So each time U.S. talks about CVID, complete denuclearization of North Korea first, that means that U.S. does not want any progress at all. So as long as we don't hear that word, I think it's a good sign.
It's a good sign. Jianqun, is that a good sign? Are we expecting any progress without CVID here?
Yeah, there is an opportunity for all the parties concerned to implement such a proposal at this moment, because everyone knows the stability and the peace in Korean Peninsula is good for all the countries concerned. So this time, I'm sure DPRK will give some further compromise, and ROK will give some and further proposal or action taken to maintain such a momentum to maintain the peace and stability in Korean Peninsula.
So hopefully some trust and momentum could be created for peace discussion. With that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. You can find me on Twitter, Xu Qinduo in one word. Thanks for watching. See you next time.